Hi, this is Dan and Mix, and I think the purpose that we were just talking about, like what the purpose of this call was, and it's to kind of working on projects in sort of adjacent spaces, and I'd been raving about how much of a good time I'd been having with the current stack that we're building with Āhau, and wanted to Dan, partly so that we can like share learning, partly because of sharing learning, I mean, making this video even more accessible than just to Dan. What did you want to get out of it, Dan?
What you've just described, I'd be happy with to see what you've been up to over the last period.
Yeah. And so you were saying, you were just saying, where have I got to? So I'll screen sharing. So yeah, you were just saying, did you get to a 0.2 release? And man, I had these tabs open just a moment ago. Yeah, we've got a 0.2 release, and so what it looks like is this right now. Yeah. So the main functionality in Āhau is you arrive, log in. This is my profile. There's currently not very much on it. You can explore different whakapapa records. So this is my maternal line. I haven't added too much to that yet. I just did like a demo this morning, so this is like a more complete one on my father's, this is my grandfather's descendants, all of his blood descendants. Yeah, and so this is where this currently is all of these records are just encrypted to me, so nobody else can read them. We don't have groups yet, but planning on that for hopefully the next release. Other things we have are the ability to make communities, and so these are just a special type of profile which we're going to collect and attach things to. So for example, a community profile is kind of going to be like a whānau or a hapu, like and that will be like kind of analogous to the spaces that you were describing. They're like a group.
And how are they subjectively administered? So I'm assuming, like, how does that interact with kind of the P2P Lego bricks that you've been building it with?
So we've been using what we're calling tangles and scuttlebutt in the back end to they're kind of like a Git sort of linked list in terms of Git, where like each commit is just an update to a particular thing. And so we've got, if we look at this as an example, there are 3 different data types going on here. One of these is a profile, and so each of these kind of behaves like a little Git repo where it's got like an initial commit and then like updates to it. So there's one for Laurie, and that's a standalone thing. The second type of data record in here is a link, and so we've got something called like another message type called relation. So this is there's a child relationship that's been drawn between Laurie and Michael, and again that's like got an initial commit and it's got edits because I might find out further information about that. Like I can update the fact that Michael might have been adopted, but I didn't know whether he was legally adopted, so I might want to update those, or I might want to actually I'd like to remove that link. So we can't, as you know, we can't like delete in a peer-to-peer system, so we've got like a tombstone system where we edit the record to say this record is now closed. In this case, the link is closed. And the third type is this this view itself, and there's heaps of different ways you can explore a graph of profiles that are linked together. The way we've got the idea of a view record is that you define like a starting point, in this case Laurie, and kind of like an algorithm. Like we just want to look at,
When
we
you're
just want
saying a view in this point, are we saying view VIEW or view as in the JS V
to, the
Sorry
first
to
one,
interrupt you, Clive.
the
Okay.
first one, it's just like a perspective. So um, thinking about things in terms of descendants, blood descendants from a particular person is one way to traverse the graph. It's like the rule that you'd follow is start at a person, look for all links where this one is the parent, and then follow those links, and then do that again. And so that's how you end up with this tree that's like expanding downwards. We're going to draw another sort of tree, which is like, I want to see all of my ancestors. And that would be like, for Ziva, that would be look at all of the links where I'm the child, and she would immediately find Mix and Alana, and then do that recursively. So she would jump up and see that like Mix had two parents, Bob and Barbie, and then this is Bob's parents. Barbie's parents would be another tree out here. Alana's parents and grandparents, so it'd be a tree that would be expanding upwards like that. Anyway, a view, what I'm calling like a whakapapa view, is just a recipe for like an algorithm for how to draw a graph. So those are the three sorts we've got here. And in terms of the like, you asked a question about subjectivity. At the moment, all of these are just authored by me, but this record here for Michael could have been authored by Michael's family, and I could have referenced that. I might just be able to link to it. I might not be able to edit his profile per se, or I could share edit permissions on Michael's record. Yeah.
That's really neat.
And I've done a bit of work to in preparation for multi-editor stuff, so that it's possible that with like a subjective system you can have two concurrent edits. So I'm adding support for like merge conflicts, detecting when you've got concurrent edits that collide, and then need to figure out a UI for how to resolve those, but have like a programmatic way to detect if a merge is a valid merge that resolves a conflict or not, and then can continue editing. But yeah, so I'm happy to talk about those sort of nuts and bolts, but I was kind of interested in talking about the dev set, like showing you a bit of the dev setup with Vue and stuff.
Yes.
So we've just used like fairly straight out of the box stuff, like Vue CLI gets you set up with like a basic folder structure. So maybe I'll wondering which things to show you first. So I think broad strokes to start with. This is a what's it called? You start with a bunch of like source code for your component, like for your UI, like made up of components and views and routers and stuff. And then all of this gets bundled by Webpack.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with bundling?
Enough.
Yeah. So basically all of that stuff in the source folder gets compressed down into these different JS files. But that's only in production. So we've got two sort of source branches for our app. One of them is all of the stuff in here. And so the way we start our app is, oh no, this will have generated some problems. There's this serve command, which is just basically starts a Webpack dev server. And so this provides the current project at localhost 8080, and it just live updates. Whenever there's any change to that source folder, it just rebuilds things and will update the view.
Yeah.
The second part we've got running is Electron and the server. So That's kind of like the back end. So the front end needs to be able to connect to like a database and stuff. So once this is ready, the front end will connect back. The front end will be able to connect to a server which will serve data up, and yeah. So this is our like dev setup pretty much, is we have these two processes running. And so you can use, I can use Electron here, or I can not use Electron and I can use just a standard browser with 8080.
Yeah.
So that's quite nice. I'm doing that quite a lot because they're updating properties, and some of the tools in here are good.
Yeah.
So you're a little bit familiar with Vue, I guess?
A little, yes, but level.
Yeah, so the root of the app, really, it says start the app here, declares, yeah, we're setting up like an app bar, but I think a router and supply, which means we can fairly quickly because it's a material based.
Okay. Look into if it's easy to view, and then also I understand sort of GraphQL.
Yeah. So
pop up, like how that.
Sure. So let me see. I just want to find a good example of something GraphQL like. Yeah, so maybe I'll just show you the view router's really nice. It's kind of behaves as I would expect a router to behave. You sort of define all these different routes and then say if a person goes to whakapapa, then which component would that load? And it's just a component. So here's the whakapapa index. So that is just got to wait for it to connect to the dev server in the background. So the whakapapa index is this one, just this page. So I'll show you. So these things that are prefixed with v dash, these are like custom Vuetify components. So they've got a whole kind of templating system. So vContainer makes a specific style of container, and you can put rows and columns in them. And this 12 is like, a column can have a width from 1 to 12, so you can stack some number of columns as long as they add up to 12 within a row. It's like a fairly common CSS sort of framework thing I've seen. And then there's this vcard component, and that vcard is this thing here. And then vcard has a vtitle and a vsubtitle within it, and it just immediately does those different stylings for you. So it does reduce your. It does make it can make it a little bit hard to fix things later, like if you wanted to do step out of that styling. But for a simple starting place, it's quite nice. You still there?
I am. I was having network issues, so I've taken my camera and mic off. But yeah, this is really it's good. Allows you to move quickly when you're getting set up.
Here's the documentation for Vuetify cards. So it immediately lets you build something that looks like this without having to spend a couple of hours on styling. And it's just that much code for that. And there's no CSS, it's just done. Yeah, so we've been enjoying that. So I'll show you some Apollo stuff now. So Apollo is what we're using for GraphQL. It's a GraphQL implementation. So on the front end, one way you can use it is you can just provide this like particular property on the component, Apollo, and then we've got two queries we're running. There's in this one, there's who am I and views, and each of these will be attached to, we set up like where they're going to land, who am I and views, up in the data attributes, the like local state of this component. And then this is the query it sends off. It sends off a query, who am I, particularly like what's my profile ID and what's my feed ID are the things that I want to know. And for views, this gets all of the views it knows about. These are different whakapapa views. And I want for those the ID, name, and description. And then
I'm really unfamiliar with GraphQL, but is this connecting to the work that was coming out of the Rusty Choir at all?
No,
is that a separate?
No, they're using GraphQL,
thing?
but so we're not using their GraphQL. We're just using GraphQL and writing our own. I can show you how this works in the back end, but maybe I'll show you, because one of the other nice things you get out of GraphQL is a GUI. It just automatically gets you if I can remember. So you can run a query and it fails. Okay, because I think. So what's interesting is that GraphQL leaves you with like documentation. So I can do a top level query for persons, which is like a plural of person. And what this says is persons, you need, returns an array of profiles. That's what that says there. And then so for each profile, the definition of a profile is it can have all of these properties on it. So let's say I want to get the persons, and I just want to get their names, preferred names. We'll see if this works. So there's only one person in the database right now. So there are three different views. These are the whakapapa views. There's my mother's side, my father's side, and then this other duplicate record. But I can also like ask for more detail.
It's really neat.
So where this is really powerful is so we'll pull up this record for mix and like let's go look at the definition of persons. So a person can have a profile, and then this particular, we need to do some refactoring because this isn't gonna give as rich an example as I wanted to, I don't think. Yeah, so what I can do is yeah, unfortunately this isn't going to give as rich an example, but it's okay. We can do stuff like close whakapapa, and this is a that's like find me the parents and children of this particular profile. So this is mix, but I want to know who his parents were. And it's telling me that you can't just say parents, you need to tell me which fields you want on the parents. Well, I want their preferred names as well. So what's super powerful about GraphQL is, as a front-end developer, you don't need to know how this data was acquired, you just ask for it in the structure that you want it, and you get it back in the structure that you wanted. So you have to do very little data manipulation on the front end. And it could be that there were like you don't know this, but in the back end, what we do is we look up this profile first to figure out what its name is. So that was one record. Figuring out the parents, that query there is looking for all the records that backlink to this profile. So that's a second query. And then there was a third query for each of those endpoints that they were linked to. Now look up the profiles of them. And so that's how we got Bob and Barbie, the names out. That was 3 queries, but on the front end, I didn't need to know anything about that. I just think about things like relationally, and it just arrives. And it means that you can like write, if you want, you can write a messy algorithm for getting this information together and then like improve it and make it more efficient perhaps later.
And can you show me an example of where that's just an example of where you're using it in your front end?
So here's an example. I want to get the views. I need to know for each view, I want to know what its ID is because I need to create a link to it. I want to know what its name is so that I can display it, as in I need to know that it's called the Irving family view or the Maver family view, and I want to show the description as well if there was one. So Apollo does some magic where if you put a query into the component like this, it just auto runs it for you and attaches the results here. You can write a manual query which does the same thing, but this is just like a sugary convenience thing. And then the views is used up here in the templating. It's like for each of those views that came out in the results, make a card, and this to field is another like viewtify sugary thing which says that means like it's a link to the Whakapapa show view with the and here's it's Whakapapa / that ID is what that generates. So like if I click on this, you can see that the view is Whakapapa / and that's the param for the ID that just got chucked in there. Is that all right?
That's great. My brain's slowing down now as I absorb and churn, so I should just be in capture mode. So where are you now compared to where you wanted to be for release like 0.2, and like what's upcoming, I guess? So to ask that question in a different way, like how did you get to be where you wanted to be, and then what have you learned that's going to inform going forward? Because embedded in a lot of this front end stuff is kind of like the design of what is it you're trying to show and why, like if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm interested. It's an interesting question. I guess I want to check if it serves in my mind, the purpose of this call was to, I guess, compare notes on learning, and that could be about code or about process. I feel like you have a fairly strong process already, so I'm wondering if I feel like I could show you a couple more things about what GraphQL looks like.
Yes, go for it.
Okay, I'll do that and then maybe we can come back. So it doesn't really matter too much, but we start Electron up, and then the next thing we do is start a GraphQL server once the SBot has started up. And what the GraphQL server looks like is, this is just some configuration stuff. But all of these things over here in this playground, the reason that it was able to like provide these docs and do predictions, like when I mistype this, is because there are these type definitions, and so there's like, this defines what is each query and what is it made up of, and it means that it gives you nice type checking. So if you ever put something in wrong, GraphQL will just tell you that you've asked an invalid question. You just or if something tries to answer a question with GraphQL and it tries to send a result back that is in the wrong form, it just fails and says your background methods didn't work, go fix them. So type definitions just look like this. So let's look at one of those ones that you already saw. A whakapapa view is just defined as any record which can have these things on them, and if it's a name, then the result in the name has to be a string. That's all that means. So I don't think this is too mind-blowing. It just helps quite a lot. Do you have any questions about that?
So to get my head around this, in comparison to like test-driven development where you've got some notion of what you're trying to do, you write tests for it. So is this, when you're creating the playground, where in your workflow, when you're developing a new feature, does it come in as part of that flow? Do you know what it, because it strikes me that for this to be able to help you, you need to ahead of time a bit more understand the design of the components, the wrong word.
Yeah.
But does that...
Yeah, we kind of...
like, where did you start? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, good question. I think we've got a bunch to learn about that. I'm not using this playground so much. I think this will be more useful for people who are coming after to try and learn what's available, what they have access to. And so I want to do a bunch of work to make this a little bit better documented even, and with more like richer, more consistent naming, for example. But I think we've done like designs for these views and thought about what we need on them, and then thought about what sort of what queries we want to run to get the data, to get this data on a page. This particular view is quite hard for reasons I don't want to get into right now. Other views like this one are a lot easier at the moment because there's one profile, it's me, and I just want to get some of these basic pieces of information attached to my profile. Yeah, so in answer to your question, probably drawing up designs, you can build out this sort of thing, this sort of interface without having any GraphQL hooked up. You just have some dummy text that's automatically loaded in, say, somehow magically. And then later on you can plug in the back end, which is like getting that data. And by that point you know what all the variables you needed were because you've already put them in here in some form. You're like, well, I definitely need to know what the views are going to be, and an example view would look like, I know that I need the data to be like, probably we started out doing something like this. And then like if I just if none of this Apollo stuff was connected, that would still render, he says confidently. I don't know what that who am I was being used for. It's probably going to be fine. So if I come back to this whakapapa view, I don't know why that's doing that, that's real weird.
But I kind of get it. So it's in part the GraphQL program is thinking towards the future. It's kind of self-documentation, providing resources for future you or future people coming in. It kind of comes in after you've done your kind of wireframes, thought of what it is that you want, stitched the front end to the back end, and then kind of that's when GraphQL kind of enters. In a sense, I'm coming at this from the subjectivity of, I'm assuming, have you used GraphQL before, or is it like something you're coming to starting to use for this
It's something
project?
that I'm brand new to, but Luandra has used a bunch in the past. So I've been learning a bunch from him.
Got it. Because it's really neat, and I love it, and I can already start to see. I've been trying to, the pieces in our network are humans and their devices, and there's some notion of humans form groups, and groups can have like co-owned devices. So that's somewhat like in the same neighborhood as whakapapa in a sense. So I've been trying to like think through how do we represent this. And so I'm really glad we jumped on a call, because this has given me a lot of food for thought. I wonder around. I don't know. Yeah, this might be outside of scope of this call, but essentially around. Yeah, is probably. I was going to ask about onboarding and initial discovery, so that you have. There's some ID involved. At what point is that generated? Is it assigned externally, or does it require people to first be onboarded into the Āhau universe, if that makes sense?
Slightly out of scope. Slightly out of scope, but very briefly, when you start up Āhau, it creates a key pair for you, and you can start using the software immediately. If you want to do anything collaborative, then you need to form an agreement, like find other peers and form agreements with them, like joining a shared group where you're sharing some sort of access key. And we haven't. There's a bunch of that needs still building and designing.
Neat. So my brain's a bit at capacity. I don't know on your end.
Hold on a second. I wanted to show you one final thing with GraphQL, because it was the final piece, and I can just touch it really lightly. The type definitions show us, define what the shape of information, questions coming in and answers going out from GraphQL are. The final piece is these things called resolvers. So this here is each of those things then has a method associated with it. So when a question comes in on the views query, we run a function and we send this does something with scuttlebutt, does a query, and then the results get sent back out. This is the final piece,
Is that how you're achieving the result of essentially being able to ask one thing, but under the hood there's three compound queries?
That's
happening?
Right, yeah.
Is that where this logic is happening?
So an example, that complex one with close whakapapa, here it goes away, and so where is it? All of the detail of that is hidden in here. It starts off by just getting the first profile, and then it goes and gets the parents and the children, and then like fills out their details. So all of this like junk is happening in the background, but yeah, the person at the front doesn't need to know about that. And GraphQL does some really smart stuff where you can say, if they didn't ask about the parents, don't go and fill in the parents' detail, just run the like resolution of the bits that were needed. So if you didn't need the name, then don't bother running the naming, like get the name query.
This is super neat.
So we'll leave it there technically, because you were saying you were sort of at capacity. Were there any other questions you wanted to ask?
Yes, as always, but like I know my tendency is towards like spiral threads. So I'm not sure like how many, and it would be interesting, like where are you taking what's working and like what's like what you then build on top of that.
So for this, particularly for Āhau, what is building whakapapa out, so family trees like that. We're looking at, there's a bunch of like feature adding to that. So at the moment you can only add parents and children, you can't add partners. Partners can be derived. What if you have a partner that doesn't have any children yet? So some things like we want to like be able to visualize different sorts of relationships. So at the moment, some of those links are adopted family links. This is my child. Or Māori has, Te Ao Māori, they have a concept of whāngai, which is like adopted but different. Sometimes it can be like a gift from a family to I'm probably, but my understanding is it can sometimes be like a gift and a way to bring together two different groups, where there's like a person who goes and is cared for by another family, and they may or may not be legally adopted as well as part of that. And so we need to and want to visualize that. So show me a graph which has only the blood relatives, because sometimes that's relevant. Show me the graph including all relatives with any sort of link that is considered. So there's a bunch of like visualization work. There's also then a piece around private groups. So we want to be able to collaborate on these graphs. So I could start this one of these broader family and all contribute to it. Need to add authors to things. So like say we have a great-grandmother who's deceased and you and I want to be custodians of her record. Need to do that in a way that doesn't merge conflicts of data. And then we want to have the ability to have different versions of the same profile. So sometimes that's because there are duplications. I accidentally made a copy of my sister and so did you. We want to point, sort of same, these two records are the same and either like magically merge them or just versions being maintained by different people. And then there's like across different trust boundaries there might be different same records. So I might make two versions. There's a public facing version of my grandmother's record, that's all you need to know. Family version for just me, and heaps of details. Where did she live? What were the stories about her? How did she meet my grandfather? How many lots of photos attached, or oral recordings, don't know. And so that's like that's the adding like items. So I'm not really sure what we're going to call them, but things that aren't people or communities. Could be artifacts, photos, recordings. I'm going to turn the jug off because I'm recording something. In 5 minutes or so. Yep. So all of those sorts of records. Once we've got that, the idea is that this will be a foundation for communities to understand who they are, where they're from, and on that, once you know, not just my cousin, but like this is how they're my cousin, and exactly where we're back to like what our common ancestor was, and what our relationship and our parents' relationship was with this land, then it maybe makes more sense to start building coordination tools on top of that. Like I want to contact that cousin, and because we now are super clear about like what our relationship is and what our shared history is, maybe I could go stay at their place when I'm traveling through Australia, the country known as Australia, or maybe we could start thinking about things that we could do with this piece of land in our family. I want to know who would be interested in doing something, building some new houses together, or something. So there's like the coordination piece, and then like moving from coordinating, just contacting people and making maybe decisions together, through to managing like shared assets and building assets for and around community. That's the vision, which will like be years of work, no doubt.
Hey, thanks for this. Good. It's given me a lot of food for thought. I'm going, and I guess I saw, maybe is it hosted under SSBC? Where's the code?
Āhau's repo is primary repos on GitLab at the moment. This is our organization. So we've got SSB profilers for managing profiles, and then I wrote a module single, which is doing a bunch of the... I want to do a talk about this at some stage as well, because it's basically making CRUD on like create, read, update, destroy type things on top of a peer-to-peer system. That's mainly where the code is.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm interested in talking in the future about... I'd love a tour of the Cobox CLI tools so far, and I have no idea what it's like to use, or how you've done it. I'd love to see that, because we're definitely going to want to bring images as something we can easily do in Scuttlebutt, but when we start to want to like weddings or funerals, their tangies, or family gatherings, whatever stories, I think it would be good to talk about, and maybe whether it makes sense to use that or other tools.
Would love to. I'm the wrong person for that. That would be Kieran or Peg, like have their heads stuck in that and actually build that out. I'm working on the front end stuff purely, speaking to people. But yes, let's do that. Yeah, for sure. Because I think it's a stable API. It's RESTful, so you just basically fire off your requests to it, and it should. So certainly by March, probably February, a fixed state working, minimal version of 0. By that point, testable sooner rather than later.
Cool. Yeah, look forward to it. And I'm going to stop the line if I put it on YouTube.